On a cold October morning in 2016, the small, quiet town of Cottageville became the focus of national news. Amanda Adkins woke up to find her world shattered. Her 10-month-old daughter, Emily Berringer, was lying in the basement, unresponsive. Her tiny body was bruised and battered, her life slipping away. Nearby stood Amanda's boyfriend, Benjamin Taylor, shirtless, his jeans undone, and his face disturbingly cold. "What have you done?" Amanda screamed, her voice cracking with panic and rage as she scooped up her baby and called 911. The horror of what had happened was only beginning to unfold. Today, we will uncover how this unthinkable act destroyed a family, shook an entire town to its core, and sparked a fight for change that still echoes today. This is a story of unimaginable loss, relentless justice, and the hope for a safer future.
I don't know how I could deny it if I don't remember. I wouldn't feel comfortable denying it, but by me reading the two recorded conversations with Lucas Casto and Hart, it says in there once that I ain't touched that child like that.
Cottageville was not a place accustomed to tragedy. Nestled in the rolling hills of West Virginia, it was a community where everyone knew one another and doors were left unlocked. News of the brutal crime spread like wildfire, shaking the town to its core. The details were horrifying and incomprehensible, leaving residents grappling with a profound sense of loss and disbelief. Amanda had recently moved to West Virginia with her 4 children, searching for a fresh start. Benjamin Taylor entered her life at a time when she was vulnerable yet hopeful. Their relationship began with promise. Benjamin was charming, attentive, and showed genuine interest in her children. He frequently brought small gifts for the kids, played with them, and even talked about how much he wanted to be a father figure in their lives. Amanda, who had endured her share of struggles, found his kindness reassuring. Friends of Amanda recall how she would often gush about Benjamin, describing him as a good man who seemed to genuinely care for her family. He talked about their future together, mentioning plans for marriage and dreams of buying a house where they could all live happily. In the early days of their relationship, Taylor's behavior matched his words. He attended school events for Amanda's older children and even helped her navigate the challenges of single motherhood. But as the months went on, cracks began to show. Amanda started to notice Taylor's mood swings, especially when he drank. Could Amanda have seen the warning signs earlier, or was Benjamin's darker side too well hidden? He would become distant, sometimes even irritable, yet he always managed to charm his way back into her good graces. "He could be so sweet," Amanda would later tell investigators. "When he was sober, he was amazing. It was like he was 2 different people." On the night of the tragedy, Benjamin seemed quieter than usual. Amanda dismissed it as one of his moods, unaware that her life was about to change forever. The man she believed would protect her family instead became the source of its greatest pain. What would you do if someone you trusted betrayed you in the worst possible way? When police arrived at the scene, they found Taylor attempting to wipe something off his groin. Blood was smeared on his torso, and a wet spot stained his pants. Nearby, Emily lay in a heap of blood-soaked blankets. The sight was so harrowing that even seasoned officers struggled to process the horror before them. Officers recounted the eerie silence in the house, broken only by the occasional sobs of Emily's mother, Amanda, who clutched her phone as she called out for help. One officer later described the basement as a scene of unimaginable violence, the kind that leaves a permanent mark on all who see it. Evidence collection began immediately, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail. Blankets, clothes, and Taylor's own jeans were bagged and sent for forensic analysis. Blood spatter patterns were analyzed, and the floor of the basement was swabbed for DNA. Officers later testified that the air in the room felt heavy with the weight of what had occurred, a darkness that lingered even after they left.
Well, day 2 of the Benjamin Taylor trial continued this afternoon. Taylor is accused of the murder of 10-month-old Emily Berringer. Understanding of what they saw when they first arrived on scene. Body camera footage was also played for jurors. The footage shows Taylor inside of the apartment with blood on his stomach. Deputies say there was also blood spattered throughout a pile of blankets on the basement floor.
And at that time, did you see anybody else in the basement?
There was nobody else in the basement, no ma'am.
Just you and Deputy Saltzgater?
Yes ma'am.
Was there an exterior door?
There was.
Was it closed?
It was closed, yes.
Meanwhile, Amanda's other children were found huddled together upstairs, unaware of the full extent of the tragedy unfolding below. Social workers and child protection officers arrived to ensure their safety, while Amanda was taken aside to provide a statement. The mother's grief was palpable as she recounted finding her baby unresponsive, her voice trembling with disbelief and sorrow. "I've not encountered anything of this nature as long as I've been here," Jackson County Sheriff Tony Boggs would later say. The brutality of the crime shocked law enforcement, leaving many haunted by what they had witnessed. Emily was rushed to Charleston Area Medical Center, where doctors fought desperately to save her life. Despite their efforts, the injuries were too severe. 2 days later, the 10-month-old succumbed to her wounds, her short life tragically cut short. Vigils were held across the town as residents struggled to come to terms with the loss. Candles illuminated the night as neighbors gathered to honor Emily's memory. Her handprints and footprints were pressed into plaster, a fragile, poignant reminder of a life stolen too soon. Amanda, overwhelmed with grief, spoke of her daughter's resilience. "She was born 8 weeks early, but she was a fighter," she said. "She didn't deserve this. She deserved so much more." As the investigation unfolded, the community demanded justice. Anger and sorrow permeated the air as details of the crime emerged. Residents organized rallies, calling for harsher penalties for crimes against children. Vigils were held not only in Cottageville, but across the state, with people lighting candles and holding moments of silence in Emily's honor. A petition calling for Taylor's execution garnered over 50,000 signatures before being removed for violating federal laws. The petition's popularity reflected the overwhelming outrage felt by the public. It was not just the nature of the crime, but the trust that Taylor had violated as someone Amanda believed she could rely on. The betrayal struck a chord with parents everywhere, sparking broader conversations about child safety and the responsibilities of caregivers. The crime also reignited debates about the death penalty in West Virginia, which had been abolished decades earlier. Some state legislators cited the case as a reason to reconsider capital punishment, arguing that the most heinous crimes deserve the harshest penalties. Others contended that the focus should be on prevention, calling for increased resources for child welfare programs and stricter background checks for individuals entering family households. How could so much evidence still leave room for questions? Detectives worked tirelessly to piece together the events of that night. Over 40 items were sent to the West Virginia State Police Forensic Lab for analysis, a staggering number compared to the usual 8 or so items typically examined in a homicide case. Among the evidence were Taylor's genes, which tested positive for Emily's blood and biological evidence. The basement floor was also found to be stained with the infant's blood. The meticulous forensic work included not only analyzing physical evidence, but also reconstructing the timeline of the night's events. Investigators combed through Taylor's phone records, revealing searches for explicit material during the early hours when the crime likely occurred. These digital footprints became a crucial part of the case, suggesting a sinister mindset leading up to the act. Meanwhile, Amanda's statements provided chilling context. She recalled Taylor's odd behavior earlier that evening, detached and unusually quiet, but had no inkling of the horror that was to come. As evidence mounted, experts analyzed blood spatter patterns and the layout of the basement to determine the sequence of events. The forensic team's conclusion was grim. Emily's injuries could not have been accidental. The evidence suggested prolonged violence, with multiple indications of trauma. Investigators noted the patterns of bloodstains and determined that the assault was prolonged, occurring over a significant period of time. This added a layer of premeditation that prosecutors would later use to build their case. Moreover, the placement of objects in the basement provided chilling clues. A bloodied blanket was found near the center of the room, while other items suggested attempts to clean up the scene. Experts testified that the positioning of these objects aligned with the timeline of the attack. Adding to the weight of the case were swabs taken from Taylor himself, which revealed Emily's DNA on his torso. The digital evidence, such as incriminating internet searches, further established intent and a pattern of disturbing behavior leading up to the crime. Together, the physical and digital evidence created a haunting narrative that left little room for doubt about Taylor's culpability. Angela Gill, a forensic scientist, also discussed how the condition of some samples was compromised. The sheer amount of blood lost may have washed away critical DNA, she testified, explaining why some results were inconclusive. Despite these challenges, the overwhelming consistency of the evidence pointed squarely at Taylor. Forensic analysis revealed Emily's blood on Taylor's jeans, establishing his physical proximity during the crime. Swabs taken from Taylor's chest and abdomen contained traces of Emily's DNA, an unsettling detail that tied him directly to the victim. The basement floor, identified as the primary crime scene, was heavily stained with blood that matched Emily's DNA. Investigators noted the distinct patterns, which suggested attempts to clean the area, further indicating Taylor's efforts to conceal his involvement. Additionally, digital evidence from Taylor's phone revealed troubling searches for explicit material just hours before the crime, painting a premeditated picture of his intent. Even Taylor's demeanor at the time of his arrest raised alarms. Officers testified to his suspicious behavior, including his attempts to wipe evidence from his body. Taken together, each piece of evidence, from the physical to the digital, cemented the case against Taylor, leaving little doubt of his guilt. The defense team tried to argue that the volume of evidence was misleading, suggesting it created an impression of guilt without definitive proof. They insisted that the investigators' approach may have been biased from the start, focusing solely on Taylor while overlooking other possibilities. This argument, however, faltered in the face of the evidence presented by the prosecution. The prosecution countered this with expert testimony that underscored the deliberate nature of the crime. Each piece of evidence tells a story, the prosecutor declared during pre-trial hearings, and together they weave a narrative of unspeakable cruelty. The physical evidence, blood on Taylor's clothing, traces of Emily's DNA on his body, and the forensic reconstruction of the crime scene formed a chilling mosaic. In addition to the forensic findings, the prosecution pointed to Taylor's internet search history, revealing disturbing searches made in the early hours of the night in question. This digital trail suggested not just opportunity, but intent, cementing the narrative of premeditation. Expert witnesses detailed how the combination of digital and physical evidence was rare in its consistency, leaving the jury with a deeply unsettling yet clear image of the crime, but not all results were definitive. Angela Gill, a forensic scientist, testified that some key samples yielded inconclusive results. "If I had run this test alone, and only this test, I still could not make any conclusions," she said, referring to a sample taken from Emily. However, the prosecution emphasized that the strength of their case lay not in a single piece of evidence, but in the overwhelming consistency across multiple types of evidence. The biological samples on Taylor's clothing, the traces of Emily's DNA on his torso, and the patterns of blood found at the scene created a compelling narrative. The prosecution further highlighted Taylor's suspicious internet search history and behavior, which added context and suggested intent. Each piece of evidence corroborates the next, the prosecutor argued. When viewed together, it becomes undeniable. By focusing on the totality of the evidence, the prosecution dismantled the defense's attempt to create doubt, solidifying their case against Taylor. Friends and family of Benjamin Taylor were called to testify during the trial. They described a man who, while struggling with alcohol, had never shown signs of violence. "Benji loves kids," his mother tearfully told the court. "This is not him." But prosecutors painted a different picture. They presented Taylor's Facebook posts, disturbing memes that joked about violence and sex, as evidence of his character. When questioned about these posts, Taylor's inability to provide coherent answers further raised suspicion. Fast forward to March 2019. The trial of Benjamin Taylor was a harrowing affair that gripped the town. The courtroom was silent as prosecutors presented the evidence.
His jeans unbuttoned and shirtless. A 911 dispatcher also testified. Emily died of her injuries 2 days later at a Charleston hospital.
She couldn't hold herself up. And she started making gurgling sound.
Was she breathing normally?
No,
Did you notice any bleeding?
just a little around her nose and mouth.
How did she feel when you touched her skin?
She was freezing.
Sources close to the case say it could take up to 2 weeks to reach a verdict. Taylor is facing a number of charges. In 2017, the West Virginia legislature passed Emily's Law, which doubles penalties for crimes against children in the Mountain State.
A chilling recounting of the crime that left many in tears. Body camera footage showed Taylor lifting his shirt to reveal bloodstains on his chest. The prosecution played Amanda's 911 call, her voice trembling as she pleaded for help. "I think he terribly assaulted her," she sobbed. Forensic experts testified to the catastrophic injuries Emily sustained. Dr. Alan Mock described extensive internal bleeding and head trauma consistent with being slammed against a hard surface. Her injuries were consistent with multiple acts of harmful intrusion by an adult male, he said. Taylor took the stand in his defense, claiming he had blacked out from drinking and could not remember what had happened.
If I don't remember, I wouldn't feel comfortable denying it, but by me reading the two recorded conversations with Lucas Casto and Hart, it says in there once that I ain't touched that child like that.
Does justice ever feel complete when a life has been lost? After 4 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 2 hours before delivering their verdict, guilty on all charges. When the verdict was announced, Benjamin Taylor sat motionless, his face hidden behind his hands. His stoic demeanor throughout the trial had left many wondering if he grasped the gravity of his actions. But at this moment, there was a visible crack in his composure. During the sentencing, Taylor appeared pale and jittery. He repeatedly avoided eye contact with the gallery, where Emily's grieving family sat, clutching photographs and mementos of the child they had lost. At one point, he muttered inaudibly, a moment that drew a stern glance from the judge. After the life sentence was handed down, Taylor finally broke his silence, mumbling about his innocence and claiming to have no memory of the night in question. His words were met with audible scoffs and whispers of anger from the gallery. As he was led from the courtroom in shackles, Taylor cast one last glance toward the family, but they refused to meet his gaze. The weight of the sentence, life without parole, plus consecutive terms for child abuse, seemed to settle over him as he was escorted out. For the community and Emily's family, his subdued reaction provided little solace for the irreparable loss they had endured. During sentencing, Emily's grandmother addressed the court. Holding a tiny plaster cast of her granddaughter's handprint, she said, "A piece of all of us died the day Emily passed away." The judge, visibly shaken, called the crime the most heinous act I have ever presided over. In the wake of Emily's tragic death, West Virginia passed Emily's Law, increasing penalties for child abuse resulting in death to 15 years to life in prison. The case also inspired renewed discussions about child welfare and abuse prevention, with advocates pushing for stronger protective measures. For the town of Cottageville, the wounds left by Emily's loss are still raw. Her family continues to honor her memory, hoping her story will serve as a catalyst for change. "She was innocent," Amanda Adkins said through tears, "and she deserved so much more."